Hey buddies, Mr. Pugly here, coming at you with another Wonderlands build. Today I'm going to be showing you my Brrzerker Clawbringer build, and as you saw in the beginning, this is all about dealing as much damage as possible with Dreadwind, and thus also melee. So this is a primarily melee build, but due to the Clawbringer perks, we are able to shoot our guns as well for a decent bit of damage. Now the clips at the beginning, I was using Buffmeister, and I do know that some people don't like the use of Buffmeister at all, so here's another clip of me killing the Parasite with Dreadwind without using a Buffmeister. I'm just using a random green, as I should be opening the menu in just a few moments and you should see it, and we were able to kill the Parasite pretty easily even without Buffmeister. So that was just a good example on Buffmeister isn't going to make or break this build, but it is a nice increase in damage for your build. But before we get into the meat and potatoes of the video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and follow me on Twitch on the top right. I've been streaming 5+ hours every single day of Wonderlands, so if you're looking for Wonderlands Twitch content, make sure to follow me up there, and let's get into the video.
Legendary? Whoa! No way, dude!
First things first, let's actually cover the skill tree. Now the skill tree is going to be a weird mix of Clawbringer and Brrzerker. So I am going to first cover the Clawbringer tree because most of you guys know my opinions on the Brrzerker tree since I've used it a couple of times on other builds. Real quick, right off the bat, you know that this build is all about melee damage, so you might be wondering why I'm using Oath of Fire. Oath of Fire allows us to get a substantial increase in damage for our guns when we need to shoot flying targets. But the Oath of Fire also applies damage to a certain interaction that we're going to do every single time we melee. So the Oath of Fire is increasing our melee damage, believe it or not, but not in the traditional sense. I'll get to that in just a moment. Next, we have Oath of Thunder. Oath of Thunder is, of course, increasing our total melee damage by applying a 25% bonus lightning damage to all the melee damage that we deal, as well as Dragon Aura, boosting all the elemental damage we deal with our weapons, as well as our different abilities that we use, including Dreadwind, and increasing our Oath of Fire damage, Oath of Thunder damage, and our Brrzerker class fee ability. Next, we have 2 points of the Rebuke. Once again, this is to just get further down the tree, but it does allow us a constant proccing of Awe, so if we ever get damage, it's going to proc Awe, but our abilities and weapons do proc Awe as well, so this is mainly filler, but it's nice to have that utility in case you need to do that. We have Blastman's Favor, which summons an orb on melee and gun kill, as well as if Wyvern were to get a kill, allowing us to deal some extra damage whenever we do kill a target. Next, we have Firebolt. Once again, this is one of the more powerful pet abilities in the game. It does a decent bit of damage because the spit that spawns on the ground is environmental damage, which gets scaling, which is very, very powerful, but it does increase our gun damage when we do need to shoot, as well as Storm Breath, giving us some damage reduction if we ever so need it. But the important part is getting 3 points into Awe. If you guys aren't aware, whenever you proc Awe, it gives a 33% critical hit chance when we do lightning damage. Now, the important part here is that Awe applies its crit chance differently than every single other thing in the game. It applies it at the end of the formula, flat increase. So this is a 33% flat increase of critical hit chance at the end of the formula after everything calculates. For example, our Smart Armor, which is the armor we're using, reduces our total crit chance by 50%, but increases our total hit damage by 50%. The important part is that all this 50% reduction happens in the formula, and then Awe applies a 33% at the end of it. Say if we have a 10% chance to crit every single time we melee, this is going to make it 5%, and then the 33% from Awe is going to make it 38% crit chance, which is invaluable on a build like this. This gives us a better chance at one-shotting foes, as well as increasing our total DPS, which is phenomenal. If we had access to more points, I would put a point into Indomitable for survivability, as well as a 20% bonus lightning damage, but we have survivability in the build besides that with the gear we use, and having 3 out of 3 on Awe is very, very valuable. Because we go this far down in the Clawbringer tree, this means we can only put 1 point into tier 5 on the Berserker tree, but that's completely fine because it allows us to put 1 point into Blast Chill, which allows our damage to be super, super high. As you saw in the beginning of the video with the montages of me killing bosses, a lot of the damage that you saw that were big bursts were because of Blast Chills. Making sure to get this is invaluable, as well as our armor piece giving us another point into this, allowing it to deal even more damage, because normally it's only 25% of the melee damage dealt, now it's 50%, so it's even better. Now let's go to the Berserker tree. We have 5 points into Ancestral Frost to increase our frost damage. This increases the damage of our Dreadwind as well as our class feat. 5 points into Savagery to increase our melee damage, but it has 4 extra points from our armor, allowing it to go to 36% more melee damage. I'll be honest, if I had an armor piece with 4 points in Dragon Aurora instead of 4 points into this, it'd probably be better overall because it would increase our Blast Chill better, but we don't have a lot of melee damage bonuses on our build, so this does help the damage formula probably a tiny bit more for just hitting enemies regularly. Next, it was a toss-up whether or not I wanted the old ways or Icebreaker, because we're going to need points down here to do our build better. So I thought since we're killing enemies so quickly, we're probably not slowing them down much, so I don't think Icebreaker was that substantial of an increase, as opposed to constantly having the 30% damage when close to enemies, and the damage reduction, which is very useful because when you get up close to enemies, enemies are going to melee you, and melee damage hurts a lot with any enemy that you find. The damage reduction is very nice, but the damage increase is always going to be 30% because we need to get up close and personal to really do our melees. And then next we have Ancient Fury to increase our area damage. Area damage increases the damage of our Blast Chill, so that's very, very important. And then we have Relentless Rage, which allows us to enrage whenever we kill an enemy while we are in Save Your Soul, which allows us to have a constant uptime of enrage. Is very valuable because enrage does a lot of damage for your build, as well as allowing us to stay in Save Your Soul for longer if we ever need to, so it allows us to have a higher chance of getting up from Save Your Soul. On our hero stats, we do have maxed out strength because we are critting a ton on this build because of Awe, so maxing this out is very, very valuable as well as most builds. So we're just going to optimize most of our damage by maxing out strength. Maxing out wisdom allows the dots that proc on enemies to deal large amounts of damage. Since we're dealing so much damage, they're going to apply large dots, so maxing out wisdom does help our total DPS overall for bossing, as well as maxing out attunement because we want Dreadwind to come back as much as possible because that is where our big burst window is. Now you might be wondering why I'm not increasing dexterity. That's mainly because we're using smart armor, so it's not going to give us as much of a bonus as possible, and Awe allows us to get so much crit chance, so we don't really necessarily need to increase dexterity. If you really wanted to, you could actually go 50-50 on intelligence and attunement, so you can have Buffmeister up more. I found having more attunement allows us to get Dreadwind out faster, and you know, that's where most of our damage really is. Next, let's go over our gear. Now, as most of you are aware, Livewire is an essential part of any melee build because when we do melee, it's going to proc the Livewire effect, which then wires a chain lightning between the enemy and a bunch of other enemies that are around the map. Surprisingly, it has a really large range, which is very nice for when we're melee people. The damage of the chain lightning is going to be dependent on how much damage you do with the melee. This Livewire effect only procs on every 2 melees, so occasionally you won't see it proc when you hit with a melee, but it will come out there every 2 hits, so keep that in mind. As well as having a volatile liquid cooling just in case we ever have any flying enemies that we can't kill with using our live wire. So this is just a nice tool to have to just burst down any flying enemies or any obnoxious enemies that aren't in your melee range. But most of the time I mainly hold the live wire because it is able to deal some pretty nasty damage as well. Next, our main weapon is going to be the Wailing Banshee. This Wailing Banshee is our main mobbing tool because every single time we melee someone, it's going to proc 3 homing projectiles to any enemy behind the actual enemy we melee, which then does 50% of the damage that we dealt to the main target. And these homing projectiles are able to proc Blast Chill, which then allows us to deal lots and lots of damage. Unfortunately, these homing projectiles don't get the property of Echo, which is okay, because the main important part is getting these homing projectiles a chance to spawn Blast Chill, which does allow our Echo to deal some more damage, which is very, very nice. And if you guys aren't aware, Echo, whenever we melee someone, this can spawn on any melee weapon in the entire game. It's going to deal 10% of all non-melee damage dealt by the Fate Maker. So every single time Blast Chill activates, that is going to go into the Echo formula, allowing us to deal large amounts of damage once again. Not only that, the live wire chain lightning interaction with melee counts as weapon damage. So the live wire is a chain lightning that's always weapon damage. It's also going to go into the echo formula, which is very, very nice, allowing us to deal high damage at all times. And I didn't even mention it, since the live wire chain lightning on melee effect is considered weapon damage, this live wire is going to get Oath of Fire. So it's going to, every time we melee and proc the live wire chain lightning effect, get Oath of Fire, thus allowing it to deal even more damage, which is phenomenal. Once again, since it does electric damage by itself, it's going to proc the lightning effect of Awe, but since it gets Oath of Fire and then does fire damage, it's also going to proc both of the Awe effects. So we're going to get the 15% critical hit damage and 33% critical hit chance from Awe whenever we proc the live wire, which is a phenomenal interaction. But when I'm not normally mobbing, I do like to switch this one out for a different tool for bossing. The clips that you saw in the beginning was actually with a different tool, as I see right here. We have a random purple Valora Greatsword. It doesn't have Echo, which doesn't matter for Dreadwind, since Dreadwind doesn't proc any on-hit effects from any swords at all, so the Echo doesn't matter. But the important part is that this is equaling the damage of the Wailing Banshee, which is incredible because Wailing Banshee does a ton of damage, but it does allow us to deal cryo damage. As you see here, this is a great sword for cryo damage, thus allowing us to deal more total damage with Dreadwind, because the Dreadwind does gain the property of the elements of the sword that you have. Preferably, if my Wailing Banshee was actually Frost, I wouldn't need to switch, but the Iridescent Greatsword just allows us to get more total DPS because it is cryo, and we're mainly optimizing cryo on our build. So this Iridescent Greatsword is the sword I was using for all the montages at the beginning. That's why this is considered my bossing tool. I did try other melee weapons as well in this build. For example, the Fatebreaker. I'll briefly discuss the interactions I found with each one, but I mainly don't use them because they have less damage overall than the Wailing Banshee. We're looking for raw damage to allow our Dreadwind to deal the most amount of damage. But Fatebreaker, when you melee it summons 3 projectiles. Each one of the projectiles are able to proc Blast Chill, which is very, very nice. The Ragnarok, when you melee it, it's going to summon a ranged projectile that does melee damage, which also procs Blast Chill. And the Peg Leg allows us to just melee really, really quickly and move fast. It allows us an easier time with hitting one particular enemy and getting around the map quicker. So I found the Peg Leg to be also really, really nice with meleeing really fast, since the faster we melee, the quicker we can get the live wire effects to proc, since it's every 2 melees. But mainly for this build, I use the Wailing Banshee and the Iridescent Greatsword. Now I have 2 different sets of rings that I like to use for my builds. If I'm using bossing, I like to go for my ability rings, but if I'm just going for mobbing, I do like just my melee ring. For example, the melee ring I use right here, Sharkalescent Ring, allows our regular melee swings 15% bonus melee damage of a random element. This does not work with Dreadwind, unfortunately. It'd be really cool if it does, but it just allows our normal swings to deal more overall damage, which is very, very nice. As well as this epic ring, which allows us to get more melee damage, of course, but it has 25% more melee critical hit damage, which is phenomenal. Now for bossing, I do like to use 2 different ability rings. I like to use the Companionship Ring, which gets increased effects by 100% when you deal damage to a boss, which allows our ability damage to skyrocket to 34.2%. The reason why ability damage is really important for bossing is because ability damage does allow our Dreadwind to deal more damage, as well as Blast Chill. Now normally you might be thinking, why not just keep the melee damage, because that also affects Dreadwind. The reason for that is because Blast Chill is the reason why Dreadwind deals so much damage. So if we optimize Dreadwind and Blast Chill, we're going to deal more DPS. So that's why I equip ability rings to deal more total damage with our Dreadwinds. This is why this is our bossing tool, because normal enemies are going to die with Dreadwind no matter what. And then our other ability ring is going to be whenever we are above 50% HP, our effects are increased by 25%. And it has melee critical hit damage, which is phenomenal, and melee critical hit chance, which is also phenomenal, as well as SMG critical hit damage, which is valuable because our live wire is a SMG. But we're mainly using this once again to just go Dreadwind and be a Beyblade. So the SMG critical hit damage doesn't matter too much, but it is nice if we have a boss like the Dragon Lord that has an enemy target that's far away, like Bernadette. Next, we have the Cursed Wit. I keep the Cursed Wit on myself at all times with this particular build because our ward is going to always be depleted for the most part. So we're always going to gain the 100% increased damage dealt to nearby enemies. Keep in mind, you get more damage the closer you are to enemies. So we're going to constantly get the 100% increased damage, as opposed to builds that have this depleted and you're only kind of away from the enemy, thus giving you maybe like 50% or less increased damage, so this always gives us a 100% increased damage, which is very, very valuable. Next, we have the Smart Armor with 1 point into Blast Chill and 4 points into Savagery, as well as 50% more area damage to allow our Blast Chill to deal more damage. These two secondary stats are honestly not too great, but 30% more Berserker power allows our class feat and Dreadwind to deal more damage, which is very, very valuable. So if you're looking for an armor piece, I really would recommend the Smart Armor, especially with this build, because the 50% reduction in critical hit chance is very, very negligible because of Aw's flat crit chance increase in the damage formula, as well as the 50% more critical hit damage is very, very valuable. So try to get a Smart Armor with at least 1 point into Blast Chill, and the other 2 points don't matter that much. Blast Chill is what you need to optimize on this build. Next, of course, we have a Sacrificial Skeep. I got this one luckily out of nowhere for frost damage and Berserker power. Berserker power, of course, increasing the damage of our Dreadwind and our Blast Chill, as I'll show right here. You see Berserker power increases Dreadwind, Blast Chill, and increasing our Enrage bonus frost damage. So make sure to get as much Berserker power as possible on this build, because those three are essential to make this build deal as much damage as possible, as well as giving us some nifty survivability, because the Sacrificial Skeep will just heal us for 10 whole seconds whenever it comes out, and this occurs every 30 seconds. Might seem like a long time, but it comes back to you very, very quickly. Next, we have a Buffmeister for Cryo, just because we're optimizing cryo damage, which is very, very nice. So this really just allows us to deal more total damage with Livewire, with our melees, and the chain lightning effects from Livewire when we do melee. Next, let's just run by the enchantments. I have on spell cast, increase melee damage by 30%, while act skill active, increase frost damage by 50%. This one is probably the most valuable in the entire build. On spell cast, increase ability damage by 30%, which increases Dreadwind and Blast Chill's damage, as well as having on action skill start, increase damage dealt by 20%. On my Iridescent Greatsword, I do actually have, while action skill is active, increase elemental damage by 35%, which I think is more valuable overall because that's going to increase Blast Chills, Dreadwinds, and Enrage damage. So if I could have, while action skill is active, increase elemental damage by 35% on my Wailing Banshee, I would, but I believe I maxed out my rerolls on my Wailing Banshee, but that's okay. So ideally, try to find, while action skill active, increase elemental damage by 35% on your melee weapon for this build to deal the most amount of damage as possible. And then finally, here's just my myth ranks, but these don't matter too much. I'm going to briefly show Druid, Archmage, Blade Master, and Deadeye. And let's finally go into the field so you can actually see how this build works normally. So whenever you're in a regular biting situation, make sure to have Livewire out, because every single time you melee for the second melee, you're going to proc Livewire. So I'm going to melee this, and you see the Livewire just went active. But whenever you do see a bunch of enemies nearby, you could proc your Buffmeister and then your Dreadwind, and you're going to see your damage is just phenomenal. It's just going to melt everyone around you, making the whole area basically a cakewalk. I just cleared that encounter by pretty much just proccing Dreadwind, and I'm guessing Livewire also procced with the first melee and killed some enemies nearby, because normally just 2 enemies killed doesn't equal a counter being completed, but we were able to complete it right there, which is a great example. When you are approaching the enemies, you are able to deal a substantial amount of damage with just using Livewire. As you see right here, all these enemies are just dying very, very easily. But the main purpose of the build is to deal lots and lots of melee damage. So after you deal some damage with your Livewire, your Echo will allow you to deal some substantial damage as well. As you saw right there, we're able to kill that enemy and damage some nearby enemies because the Livewire chain lightning was able to chain to nearby foes and thus killing them very, very easily. So as you saw there, I'm able to deal lots and lots of damage to all the enemies nearby. I was even able to melee that first skeleton. If you didn't notice, I was able to kill a nearby skeleton because of the Livewire chain lightning, which just was phenomenal, because this Livewire chain lightning on melee just goes all around the map, it feels like, and just allows you to just deal some crazy random damage. But mainly, you're just really able to go to any nearby enemy and just really go to town. If I ever see a badass, I do like to use Dreadwind, as you see right here, and that enemy just died really, really quickly with no problem at all. Here's another enemy I'm just going to melee real quick. He's dead. So basically, you're going to pretty much one-shot most enemies you see very, very easily without any problem with this build. And while I'm meleeing, since I'm proccing Livewire so much with my melees as well, we're going to constantly see that bonus increased damage with Awe, which is phenomenal. And as you see right here, here's a Quartz. Now, the enemies that spawn from Quartz do take a substantial amount of damage to actually take down, but if I were to just proc this and then go into Dreadwind, it will kill the enemy instantly right there. Now, I unfortunately do have the curse of magma, so we're going to see occasionally magma spawn below me, which is why I got downed right there, because I was standing still. but we are able to get up very, very easily. As you saw there, I just gunned down that foe. Any enemy I see pretty much just gets killed super, super easily with this build. It's like phenomenal. You're able to melee them. You're able to deal lots and lots of damage by just gunning them down. Basically, you are dealing a ton of damage with melee and your gun at the same time. So if there's an enemy you can't actually reach, you're just going to gun them down very, very easily. Even with Buffmeister active, regular gunning just is extremely easy. So I use Buffmeister. All the enemies are just dying very, very easily by me just shooting them. And keep in mind, this is Chaos level 20, and I'm just taking down these people with no problem. Of course, that one was a couple of hits, but that's okay. See, that enemy was a flying enemy, so I had no chance on actually hitting him, so I just gunned him down for a little bit. So whether you shoot or melee with this build, you're going to deal a ton of damage, but the main shining factor of this build is the fact that you're able to deal so much damage with Dreadwind, which is always incredible to see. For example, I'm only going to melee on this obelisk ruin thing that's just spawned, so I'm just going to melee this, live wires procced, and just killing a bunch of enemies nearby. Here's a badass that just spawned and immediately died. Here's a swatter shroom that I just need to melee once and he's dead. I'm going to melee that guy, he's dead. And as soon as this guy spawns, I'm just going to activate my Dreadwind, and each effect... Pigwort didn't even get a chance to immunity phase there. That was crazy. But there's a great example on how much damage this build is able to do. I didn't expect that Clawbringer would add so much to the table for this build. I was honestly just excited to go with Dreadwind and see lots of blast chill, but it's incredible how much damage Awe really adds to your build because you're constantly proccing it and thus allowing you to constantly hit critical hits, just making every enemy like basically trivial. It's so easy with this build to do most content. It's incredible. I really wasn't expecting a melee build to be this strong in the game, honestly, but it's just really incredible that it just makes the game really a cakewalk. And as always, a big shout out to the members who make these videos possible. We have Jason Noodles, Clairvoyance, Rick and Glacia, Super Noob, Josh Dig, 31bar70, Doorman Tazzy, and Grey Wolf. These are the people who support me as little as $5 a month. And you can also support me as little as $5 a month by clicking the link in the comment description or in the top right to become a member. The more members we have, the closer I get to becoming full time, which means more videos for you guys. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I hope y'all have a great day. Bye-bye.
And the last shall be first to immerse in a pass out heat, facing him out with a moxie melt till he woke up drowning in tchotchke hell. War in a cave with a torch on the wall, then a window arrangement of porcelain dolls.